All right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. So check it out real quick. I need to take care of some household business. First and foremost, I just want to say, I want to extend my appreciation to each and every one of you and my sincerest gratitude for all the support that I got with respects to the Vlad interview. I've been reading all the comments. The comments are still coming in. I've responded to a lot of you so that you guys know that I'm trying to interact with as many of you as I can. I'm still going to keep on responding to the comments, but I appreciate it. I appreciate all the positive things that you guys have said. As you'll see, I'm answering as many as I can, starting from the top. So I'm going to continue to respond to them, keep the comments coming in. For those of you that keep on asking the question, you do not get paid for doing an interview with Vlad. If Vlad's paying people, then I got burned, because it's not about getting paid. It wasn't about getting paid. When I did this interview, I was told up front by his bookie and by his producers that this is not, we don't pay you for the interview. What this is we're another YouTube channel, another YouTube platform. What we do is you get paid in the form of exposure. We bring exposure to your channel and to your book. So that was something I had to think about. But it isn't always money. It always is a good thing to get exposure to the channel. My purpose has always been to, keep the channel growing. We've been slugging along for a while now, trying to get our subs up, and it's been a slow, gradual process. Like I said before, we're like that little train going up that hill that nobody thought that little train could make it. We're getting there. We're moving like molasses, but we're getting there slowly. Anyways, I want to get into this story real quick. I'm going to see if I could do that hat trick tonight. I know it's been a couple days since we put out content, but the last couple of days, trust me, I've been taking interviews and getting stories so that I could put out content for you guys, and it's time consuming. There's no way I could take these, do these interviews and take down these stories and also record them all in one night. It's not going to happen. So that's what we've been doing the last couple of days. I told you guys that I'd make it worth your while to wait until we got all these stories together, and they keep coming in. I appreciate everybody that has been tapping into my email that are willing to share their stories with us. We're going to continue to take the stories. So if there's more of you out there that are willing to share Mexican Mafia stories, you guys were there, you were on a yard, you were out there working, functioning under a Mexican Mafia member, or you were just out there on the yard and you've seen things happen, the politics, the same types of things that I've been putting stories out about. Tap in with me through my email, boxerparadigm@gmail.com, and you'll remain anonymous. If that's what you want to do, that's perfectly fine. There's a lot of active, non-active cats that tap in, and they, a lot of them say, look, just keep me in the cuts. I don't want to be out there. I don't want to be exposed, and that's something I'll never do. I'm not going to burn the people that are helping me. So you guys that have been with me for a while now, you should know that that's just not my stilo. So anyways, if you got stories and you want to remain anonymous, again, tap in with me. I'll compensate you for your time and for sharing the content with me. These guys want fresh blood, new stories. So tap in again at boxerparadigm@gmail.com. Anyways, before I get into the story, I just want to say that, it's not my intention to open up any old wounds or to bring any of the grief back up to the surface that this story might cause. I'm well aware of the fact that this story right here impacted, several families. But hopefully you'll agree that through your losses and through the grief that you guys went through, that this story right here will serve a bigger purpose. And hopefully that purpose is, that one youngster out there that thinks it's cool to go to prison, or that there's glory in going to prison, will see this or will hear this story and will understand that prison is not a good place to go to. Because there's some youngster somewhere that's intrigued with the idea of going to prison, that, I get to go to the joint and I'll go to the shoot program, and this is how I'm going to earn my credibility, my street cred, my prison cred. Hopefully that youngster will see this video and, he'll come to the realization that, what, that's not an environment that I want to go to. So with that said, this story right here is being told to illustrate some of the horrific and bad things that happen in prison. So this story, it took place in July of 1996. Yeah, it's been a minute, but it's still a good story, trust me. It took place in July of 1996. It happened in High Desert. I believe it happened on B Yard. So, from this point on, I'm going to refer to the source that gave me this story as evil. So at this time in July of 1996, this is around the time when High Desert was just opening up. I remember I left Susanville around 1992, in June or July of 1992. And I remember seeing them break ground for High Desert. On the Lassen yard, we could see through the fence that they were breaking ground over there. They had big machinery and equipment over there, and that's what they were doing. They were starting to break ground to build High Desert. So, when this story started, I'm not sure exactly when it opened up, but when High Desert opened up, before they even had benches on the yard, benches and tables, they started bussing in inmates. They started bringing guys in, and, they opened up the prison before they even finished, constructing it. So at this point, the inmates, they didn't even have tables and chairs out there on the yard. When they would go out there to the yard, they would literally have to lean up against the wall, find somewhere to squat or to sit on the ground. There was nothing to sit on out there, no tables, no chairs, no benches. Those would come in time. The inmates that were there on the yard when it first opened up, they would literally put those out there while they were out there on the yard. They would start putting in tables, benches, chairs, all that stuff would come later. So at this time, there was probably about 25 to 30 Norteños on the yard. And that's a generous number. There might even have been less. There might have been about 18 to 20, but there wasn't that many. There was probably around, from what Evil told me, there was probably anywhere from 70 to 100 Sureños on that yard. So, the numbers have always been like that. The Norteños have always been the minority. They've always been, short in numbers out there on the yards. And that's been like that since as far back as when I was going to prison. So keep in mind, whenever a new prison opens up, like High Desert, when it opened up, there's always a lot of tension, a lot of hostility. There's always a lot of conflict out there because the inmates out there are literally trying to establish themselves. They're trying to find their areas that they're going to claim to be, their territory, their benches, their tables, their handball court, or, a lot of the times they'll just lay claim to like in front of a building or somewhere like that. So you got everybody out there trying to find their way around on the yard, trying to claim an area. And a lot of the times this causes tension. A lot of the times too, they'll be trying to establish their stronghold, what building they're going to try to get, most of their leadership in, buildings that they're considered to be stronger in. That's how it's always been. The Norteños will try to, lay claim to a building. There'll be a lot more of them in that building than some of the other buildings. The Sureños do the same thing. The Crips, the Bloods, the 4-1, the Africanos out of the Bay Area, everybody does that. So Evil was on the first wave. He was on one of the first waves that hit this yard. And I want to say this was B facility. But when all this was happening, this prison was just opening up and you had all this chaos out there on the yard. At that time, there was an individual out there named Puppet from San Isidro. And that's out there by San Diego, out there, close to the border by TJ. But this individual Puppet was somebody that was well respected. All the Sureños that were out there, they respected him. He was somebody that, that ran the yard the way it was supposed to run. But he was out there for a short period of time. He would end up getting rolled up. So when Puppet gets rolled up, another individual pulls up right after he gets rolled up. And this guy, his name was Rascal from San Bernardino. Rascal from San Bernardino was somebody that nobody really liked him. I mean, it took a while for these guys to get to know him and see how he ran his program. But when he hit the yard, according to him, he said that Mondo from Black Angels was his compadre and that he gave him his blessings to run that yard. So, Rascal hits the yard and he's out there and he's like, hey, Mondo from Black Angels is my compadre. And he said that, I'm going to run this yard. So everybody out there, they pretty much respected what he said. Mondo was a well-respected Mexican mafia member. He was a reputable name. Nobody really challenged him. So nobody challenged him. He said, that he was given the yard. So that's what happened. He took control of the yard. But it didn't take long for the other Sureños out there to see how shady this individual was. This guy was having people hit left and right out there. And I mean, this happens whenever you get to a new prison. Like I said, everybody's trying to establish themselves out there. They're trying to establish control of the yard. A lot of the times, especially at this time, the North and the South were going at it. So at that time in 97, the conflict, the war between the Norteños and the Sureños, it was still in motion. It was on back in those days. In 97, it was still in full effect. And High Desert was just one of the many ground zeros that these conflicts, these wars were happening at. So Rascal was having so many people hit out there on the yard that they started calling him the Texas Tornado because they didn't know where he was going to hit next. They said he was all over the place. Primarily in the beginning, there was a lot of Sureños getting hit. He was just doing house cleaning. Something caught up with somebody, something came up. He'd have this guy hit, he'd have this guy whacked for something. Anything that came up, he was just having cats whacked. And when you're out there leading with the iron fist like that, and people start to see that you're in a position of leadership and you're abusing your people, it's not going to take long for people not to like you. And that's what happened to Rascal. He went out there trying to push a hard line fast. He was having cats hit left and right, putting green lights on everybody. So he wasn't liked out there at all. They started talking about him amongst each other like, man, fuck this dude. Somebody needs to run a check on this dude and see if it's legit, because what he's doing over here, the big homies, I'm sure they wouldn't agree with the way that this dude's running his program. So that was kind of like that was the sentiment out there on the yard with regards to the Texas Tornado. So there was a lot of things that he was doing that made them not like him. And one of the things that Evil continued to say that one of the main reasons why a lot of the Sureños out there didn't like him is because he was sending a lot of youngsters to do these removals. A lot of these youngsters that were green, they would just hit the yard. They were first termers, didn't know what they were doing, but he was sending a lot of these youngsters to hit targets for dumb shit. And then on top of that, it wasn't just the fact that these guys were green and had never really had a chance to get laced up, but a lot of times these guys were short to the house. He didn't give a fuck. Bottom line is, Evil said he didn't have no consideration. And I get it. I understand. A lot of the times when, these youngsters hit the yard, they're out there to earn their bones. And at some point you got to test their mettle and see what they're about. But you got to lace them up first. You can't just put a knife in somebody's hand and tell them, hey, go stab this dude. You got to lace them up. They got to learn how to crawl before they can walk. And then again, I understand, sacrifices come with the territory. But still, man, you're in a leadership position and you got young homies that are uneducated and are short to the house. A good leader would take that into consideration. Unless you're just, you're pressed for manpower. It's like you're really strapped. You don't got really anybody else that you can send. Everybody else is part of your leadership circle, or you need them for some reason out there on the yards. So it's understandable, but there's still, a level of consideration that you got to show your people. I mean, unless you're ruling with an iron fist and it's your objective to run your people into the ground. And if somebody's a week or two to the house, you don't send somebody like that on a mission unless, like I said, it's absolutely necessary. You're strapped for manpower. But I mean, eventually you're gonna, it's gonna get to the point where your manpower, they're always gonna acknowledge your authority. But they're only going to acknowledge your authority because out of obligation. They're not going to do it because they really respect you. And that's what a good leader is. One of the other things that Evil said that he had a habit of doing was that he would pick the upstaters. He would pick a lot of the upstaters, first to go on these missions before he would pick the Sureños from down south. And like Evil said, there's already some negative sentiment between, with respects to the relationship between upstaters and Sureños from Southern California. A lot of the times, upstaters feel like, they're looked at as not really being embraced as righteous, real Sureños because they came up in Northern California. So in light of that, it kind of became obvious to probably a lot of them that this dude right here, he's just using us. He's sending all these upstaters, to whack all these targets. Evil said that Rascal, made these guys feel like they were being used, and it was obvious that he was. So Rascal's out there causing a lot of internal detraction amongst his own people. Again, to the point to where these dudes start pushing back, and they're talking amongst themselves like, you know what, something needs to be done because this dude's causing too much conflict out on the yard. And one of the other things that Evil said that Rascal did that's not common practice is, whenever somebody would get a green light, when it would come from the back, meaning the oil, the hole, whenever he would claim that he got a kite or a wheeler that would say this individual had to go, this guy, from San Bernardino or San Gabriel Valley, whatever, this guy got to go. One of the other main reasons why a lot of Sureños didn't really care for Rascal is because something else that he was doing was real shady. It's like whenever he would claim that something would come from the back, meaning the whole leadership, usually leadership is always in the oils. They're always in the hole. Whenever he would claim that he got a green light from somebody, or he would get a letter about somebody out there on the yard, another Sureño, and he would say that individual got green lighted, he would never put another set of eyes on that wheeler so that somebody else could see it and confirm that, you know what, I seen it. And that's not common practice. From everything that I've understood about how, that works, a lot of the times when there's a leader out there and there's a green light, just to cover his own ass, he'll show that to another Sureño out there so that somebody else could vouch for him and say, you know what, I seen that letter, or I see that wheeler. So, that's one thing that he wasn't doing, is putting another set of eyes on green lights when he was claiming that he was getting green lights from either the oil or from the streets. So when Rascal, when he took over, Evil said that literally every time the doors would open, somebody else was getting whacked out there. Literally, we'd come right out and somebody else was getting hit. Again, that's why they called him the Texas Tornado. Nobody knew where he was going to hit next, but that so many people were getting whacked out there, and there was so much shit happening on that yard that a lot of cats started coming up MIA out there. You had Norteños, Sureños, some of the whites, the Africanos, they'd either go to, to the doctor, or they go to the dentist, or they go on a visit, or law library, or wherever they would go, they go on some kind of movement only to never come back. Dudes didn't want to be on that yard. Too much shit was happening out there. And, a lot of guys were just like, you know what, I'm cool, I'm done. And they were checking in. I seen that happen in Pelican Bay. It used to happen all the time. Back there in the shoot program, somebody would go out for, it's the same way. They go, either they put in for the doctor, or they put in for, to see a dentist, or they go to law library, or on a personal visit. They leave the pod and they never come back. The floor officer would come in there 45 minutes later with some bags, and he pushed the cart in, and he'd be like, hey, I need you to pack your celly's shit. He's gone. And we'd be like, where'd he go? And he'd be like, come on, man. You know where he went. He ain't coming back. So, it's common that guys would do that. And the reason why they do that is because obviously you can't just lock it up right there. If you're in the cell with somebody, you can't just be like, hey, CO, I need to, I need to move because I'm not feeling this no more. And, I just want to lock it up because I just don't want to be here. Obviously, their celly's going to take off on them. Same thing out there on the main lines. Whenever you go to the doctor, you go see a dentist, or you go out on a visit, they track your movement. You got to, when you come back, you have to let them know where you went. And, anytime there's any off-tier movement, or what they used to call OTRs, anytime you're leaving the block for something, they want to know where you're going. So whenever they would go on one of these movements, it's a lot easier, when they're away from the yard, or when they're away from their celly, to get out there and be coming back, being escorted back from a visit or something. And right there, that's when they'll check in. Hey, I need to, I don't want to go back. I'm done, man. You know what I mean? They'll lock it up right there. But that's how they were doing it out there on the yard. So the other thing that Evil said is, like, they were getting shoe kickouts left and right from Pelican Bay, from Corcoran, from Tehachapi. They were getting some good Sureños. But again, there were so many cats that were getting sent on missions to whack this dude, whack that dude. This dude, was fucking up, whack him. This guy right here, he came out with his chocolates on, whack him, or whatever. There were so many cats that were coming, to that yard from different shoes, that by the time everybody looked around, everybody that had hit the yard, all the shoe kickouts, they were gone. They went back to the shoe. He sent them back. So that cat was out there doing some crazy shit. So according to Evil, there was a norteño named Rudy Torres, Sapo, from Tulare County that drove up. As soon as he gets there to the yard, Rascal, he's got his eye on him. And you got to understand, this was 97. So the NR had been around for a while at that point, but there was a lot going on with the NR. There was an internal, war that was happening within the movement. There was a lot of people that were walking away from the movement. There were a lot of norteños that were pushing back, hermanos, that rogue NR members that were pushing back. There was just a lot of internal strife that was going on at that time. So I'm sure this was something that I always wondered about. And, I learned a lot from just listening to this story, that a lot of this, the Sureños were hearing about the structure. A lot of them were just hearing about the structure and how it functioned and how it operated at that time. And they were major targets for some of these yards. Some of these yards that these Sureños, had established, if they heard somebody was a structure member or somebody that was affiliated or associated with being a structure member, they would whack them. They would become a target. So when Sapo got out there to the yard, obviously Rascal, he had his eyes on him, and he was somebody that he perceived as a threat. But according to Rascal, he supposedly got word from Mondo, from Black Angels, his supposed compadre, that Sapo was a new structure member and that he had to go, that he wasn't welcome on that yard. And again, when he supposedly got this letter, he never showed nobody. Nobody put their eyes on that letter and confirmed it. They were just going off of his word and his word alone. And when somebody like Sapo would pull up to the yard, at that time, the Sureños, they obviously had the numbers out there. They were established. They had some Sureños working in the watch office that were in clerk positions, and they had access to pulling files. So they look at Sapo's file. He's got 137 points, and they're like, yeah, this guy, he's a threat. He's a new structure member. And, according to Evil, again, this is around the first time that some of the Sureños out there on the yard in High Desert, this was the first time that they were really hearing about what the new structure was. So for those of you guys that are confused or, have never heard the term new structure, so the term new structure, that terminology is a classification. That's what CDC uses to classify the Nuestra Raza. We've never really associated with that name, new structure. That's a label that was used by CDC to classify Nuestra Raza members. So basically, these are NR members that they're identifying. They're saying that Sapo was a member of the NR. But the other thing that was kind of funny that Evil was saying, he's like, when we first heard about the structure, we heard that there was some type of internal conflict going on within the Norteño collective, that new structure members were taking off on norteños, that norteños were taking off on them in different oils in different prisons. And then they said we heard something else about, new flowers that had just come out. So they were like, we didn't know what the fuck to think about the norteños. They were all over the place. There was like some shit going on within their car that we didn't know what to think, who was who. But anybody that was getting labeled to be, associated or affiliated with the structure, they were getting targeted. So by this point, Rascals, he's pushing for a green light on Sapo. He's already put the green light on him. He's already filtered it out to the other Sureños on the yard that, his compadre Mondo from Black Angels is the one that green lighted this dude and that he's got to go. So when they start to put this plan together to remove Sapo, the other thing that Evil told me about is that there was a Sureño out there on the yard. He was a youngster. He had been down for a minute. He was a lifer. He had life, but apparently his case was in the appeal courts or something like that. But this youngster had one of the hardest strolls on the yard. You're out there walking the track. You can only walk in one direction. That's the other thing about those level 4 yards. You can only walk one direction. If you walk in the other direction, they'll put the yard down. So not only did he have one of the hardest strolls out there, but he was out there playing the part. He was banging out there. Apparently, he was wearing some tramal, some jeans, some state jeans that were like 7 sizes too big. They were probably like some 58s. He probably had a 36-inch waist, but he had them pleated up. They were starched. He was playing the whole role. He was banging hard, hairnet, straight American me. And he'd be walking the track, and they were like, you know what, this dude, he's a rider. He's a young rider. He's probably trying to earn his bones. So, they approached this youngster. He couldn't remember his name, but they approached him. He was from Huntington Park. And, they tell me, look, this guy, this Norteño that just drove up, he's got to go. So, we're going to need you to take care of it. Right? As soon as he hears that, he throws his hands up. Oh, no, I'm going back on an appeal. I'm supposed to leave any time now. And, right there, they see that this guy, he's just playing a role. And it's usually like that. The guys that are out there trying to bang the hardest, the guys that got the biggest mouths are the ones that are the biggest cowards, or the ones that they're not going to bust a grade. So they hit him up, and already they see that he's backing up like a crawdad. So they tell him, you know what, hey, don't trip, man. We'll take care of it. Apparently, there was some older Sureño out there named Junior from Monte Flores. And, Junior was like, hey, leave the youngster alone. He's probably, it's probably best that we don't use him anyway, because just based off his reaction, his mentality, his stilo, he's probably going to tell anyway. So they decided to leave that guy alone. So at that point, Rascal, he selects 2 other Sureños to be the shooters. 2 cats that, he felt confident could handle the mission. And there were a lot of Sureños that were mad because one of them, he was a solid Sureño. He was solid, but he was short to the house. And there were a lot of Sureños that wanted to see him go home. So, they were mad at this dude again for selecting somebody that was so short to the house when there was a lot of other cats that could do it. If you got cleanup and there's something that you've done in the past, then you deserve to be put up on the block next time somebody's got to go. But apparently that wasn't the case with this dude. This dude was somebody that all the Sureños liked out there. He was an up and coming cat that, and even when they told him, hey, we're going to need you to go on this mission, even though he was short, he was like, it's all good. Just point me in that direction and I'll take care of it. So the other thing I forgot to tell you guys is the youngster that had the big pants, the one that would walk the track like he was tough with his chest poked out with his size 57 tramals. Apparently, they had a nickname for that cat. They called him Level 50. I guess they had nicknames for all kind of dudes out there. They called Rascal Texas Tornado. They called this guy Level 50. Another guy DEFCON 6. So anyways, they referred to him as Level 50. So anyway, the building that Sapo was housed in, apparently there was like 6 Norteños in there. They had like 3 or 4 cells. And then, the Sureños were pretty deep in that building. They had around 8 or 12 cells just in that building alone. And you guys got to understand, I want to say this was a 180. Don't quote me on it, but I want to say I'm almost positive it was a 180 by the way that they were running it, the way that they would release yard. And, it's like there's everything sectioned off, and you got these gun rails up top that stand right over you and will shoot right down. It's a whole different setup from a 270. A 270 is wide open. But anyways, like I said, I'm almost positive this is a 180 yard. So Evo didn't remember who Sapo Celly was, but there was an individual named Sandman from Madera. He had a celly named Flaco from West Side Boys, Delano. Then there was a YA baby from Salinas. He forgot his name. And then I want to say there was 1 or 2 other guys, but he couldn't remember who they were. But there was about 6 Norteños in that building. So at this point, the green light on Sapo is definitely a go. Now, this was the night before. So the night before everything happened, apparently that's when they made the piece. The piece that was made was made out of the top of a tuna can. This is when they would sell cans of tuna and they give you the whole can. So they're nasty pieces. If you guys have ever seen them, I'll see if I can find one. If I can, you guys will be looking at it up on the screen, but they're nasty. If you do it right, what you do is you take the top and you fold it and you can either fold it in half, or you, depending on how big it is, or you can fold it once and then fold it twice. So it ends up looking like a Christmas tree. And then you put the handle on it, and then obviously you put a point on it, you sharpen it. But if it's done right, I've seen some that they're treacherous. When you look at it, you can tell that, you know what, whoever gets hit with this, it's going to be all bad. And in fact, that's what happened with this. So Evil told me that, the night before everything happened, like I said, that's when they made the piece. There was two individuals that were selected to make it, put a point on it. These guys knew what they were doing, and they made a vicious piece. So the piece ends up going to the cell where the two individuals that were going to do it, they got the piece. And at some point they showed it to Evil, and that's exactly what he said. He's like, Box, man, when I seen the piece, when I seen the weapon that was going to be used, I was just like, damn, that's all bad. Anybody that gets hit with that, that right there looks like it could kill somebody. You guys seen some of the weapons that are out there on these main lines? They literally look like, some of the knives that you have in the kitchen, in your drawer. Some of them are worse. They're a lot thicker. They're not going to bend. They're pieces of steel. That's why they call them bone crushers. So anyway, he sees the weapon the night before, and the other thing that he told me that kind of stood out is, he's like, you know what, bro? He's like, I always understood that business always has to be taken care of, that these types of things happen. But, that human side of me, I was there in the building, and, I seen Sapo, and I looked over at him, and I was just telling myself, like, damn, this dude doesn't know it, but tomorrow he could possibly lose his life. Like, he don't know it right now, but tomorrow he's going to actually get stabbed. He said, it was just, I was looking at the dude, I was in my own thoughts, and I was just like, man, it's fucked up, but I understand things have to happen. Supposedly, according to what Evil said, all the Sureños were upset that they were going to hit Sapo. He didn't come out there acting like a threat. He didn't come out there banging. He wasn't walking around with his chest poked out. He kind of was just, minding his own business. He was only out there for a couple of days. But when this guy put the green light on him, the other Sureños out there were already pissed off that he selected somebody that was short to the house, but they were just pissed off that, he was getting ready to start a war or a conflict, and that it wasn't somebody that they felt like was an immediate threat. So the next day, the next morning, after, the piece was made that night, the shooters are picked, everything's pretty much, it's already planned out. And, the plan is to hit these guys in the sally port. The sally port is like, there's a rotunda door, there's a sally port. It's like a thoroughway that goes out to the yard. It's a short hallway. There's two gates on both sides. You got a gate that locks, that goes into the building, and then you got a gate that locks that goes out to the yard. So if they lock both gates, you're like stuck in a little hallway. That's the sally port. So they started releasing yard in A section. They start in A section, and they would let out 5 cells at a time. Then they'd open up the rotunda door. The inmates will go into the little sally port. The door was shut. Then the yard door open up. Then they go out, and then there'd be some COs out there that would search them. They pat them down, and that's how they did it. And then they sent you on your way out to the yard. Then they do the next 5, so on and so forth. So there was a process that, they would do, instead of just letting everybody out in like a 270. A level 4 yard is considered a high security yard. So that's how they ran the yard. So after the first 5 go, the second 5 go, and they keep running them. So eventually they get to a cell. There's 2 Sureños. His name's Trigger from South Central, and then you got Junior from Monteflores. So these guys, they come out, and they kind of, there's an area, if you get up against the wall right there in front of like the gun tower, right in front of the rotunda, if you get up against that wall right there, the gunner can't see you. So there was a gunner up top, and there was a female gunner, and she's controlling all the doors. She's got, control of opening up all the cell doors, the yard door, everything's electronic over there. So these guys, they kind of like just lean up against the wall, and she can't see him. they're in an area where they're like kind of like in a little blind spot. So they're running these guys out. They're running them out. Not everybody goes out to the yard. So she's not really tripping on if there's 3 or 4 or 5 guys in there. She's just controlling traffic as they come. So they're posted up. You got Trigger and Junior posted up right there by the door. And they were just there as just kind of just like lookouts, and they try to help push the traffic through, because there's a lot of other inmates that are coming out, and they're kind of like just telling them, hey, man, keep it pushing. We got something that we're getting ready to take care of, so we need you guys to keep on going. A lot of the times you'll have, other groups that are waiting for their people, so they'll kind of fall back. But they were telling them, hey, with all due respect, man, can you guys just keep it pushing, because we got something, that we got something in motion right now. So the next 2 Sureños that they let out are the 2 shooters. And apparently Sapo and his celly would be in that same group. Well, Sapo comes out. For whatever reason, his celly decided to stay back that night. As luck would have it. So Sapo comes out, and then you had 2 other Sureños. You had Flaco from Delano, and his celly was Sandman from Madera. Sandman, for whatever reason, decided to stay in his cell that night. So Flaco comes out, and he posts up somewhere with Sapo. And one of the other things that Evil said is that one of the things that the Norteños would do is that they'd always fall back and let the Sureños go first. And this was, done out of precaution and because they had less numbers. It's actually a smart move, because if there's conflict going on or possible conflict, it's smarter to let them go in front of you, keep them in front of you, rather than to, either get bunched in there or have somebody behind you. The best thing to do in that situation is do what they were doing, kind of fall back, let everybody else go, and then, they go last. So that's what they were doing. So at some point, right before the 2 shooters go into the Sally Port, I guess there were some Africanos that were trying to fall back and wait for their people. And there was another Sureño named Spooky. I forget where he's from, but apparently, he was Africano, but he was a Sureño. And he knew some of these Africanos, and he told them, he's like, hey, man, I need you guys to keep on going, because we're getting ready to handle something. The Africanos probably didn't know that they were getting ready to move on a Norteño, because you guys got to remember, at that time, there was an alliance. There was still an alliance out there between the Norteños and the Africanos at that time. I don't know how strong it was in high desert at that time, but there was still an alliance. So anyways, these Africanos, they go through, they go out to the yard. That's when you got the 2 shooters that come in. Now they're posted up in the Sally Port. So nobody else is out there except for Sapo and Flaco that just came out of his cell. So they walk into the Sally Port. Now, according to Evil, the plan was to just hit Sapo. He was the target. If Flaco tried to come to his assistance, they were just going to sock him up. They had 2 other Sureños that would come after, and their whole thing was to keep security on Flaco. Again, if he jumped, they were just going to sock him up. Regardless of whether he tried to help him or not, they were to go in on that individual. And it was never about taking Sapo's win. It was just about just whack him, get him off the yard. At least that's what Evil told me. So at some point, Sapo and Flaco, they enter the Sally Port, and they get to a point to where they post up. They get their backs to the walls. You got the 2 shooters in there, and then you got 2 other Sureños that entered the Sally Port. That's when the 2 shooters take off on Sapo. They start hitting them. It was at that point that Evil told me, he was like, you know what, B? He was like, man, when they started hitting Sapo, there was like a brief, just like a millisecond or whatever. It was like just a brief second where he made eye contact with Sapo, and he said there was a look on his face that's been seared in my memory from the day that incident happened, that I can't get out of my mind. It was a look of terror. It was a look of shock, that he couldn't believe that was happening. He made eye contact with him, but he seen fear on his face. And, like when we talked about it, he understood it just as much as I did. Of course, there's fear when you're getting stabbed like that, and you're in this type of environment, I don't care who you are. You can try to act like you're tough and that, you would never get scared in a situation like that. But fear is a natural reaction. That's what heightens your awareness. And I'm sure he felt that. You're getting stabbed. Two individuals take off on you, and even though it happens fast, it's like if you guys have ever been in a situation where you've had a near-death experience, they say that your entire life flashes in front of you within a matter of seconds. And it's true. I've had that happen quite a few times. And not only does your whole life flash in front of you, but the people that are the closest to you, your mom, family, maybe if you got kids, your wife, you see those faces. And again, it happens so fast, but these are things that really do happen. And I'm sure that was happening to Sapo at that moment. Anyways, Evil told me that these guys were stabbing him bad. It was bad. There was blood everywhere. They hit an artery. He could tell that they hit an artery because the blood was dark. And when you get that dark blood like that, you know that you've hit a main artery, but that the blood was spurting all over the walls. It was all over the floor. The two shooters, they had blood all over them. Sapo was covered with blood, and he got hit 12 times. It was 12 times. He got hit in the sternum. They hit him in the neck, in the head. He got hit in the liver. And, any one of them probably could have killed him. The one in the neck, the one in the liver, the one in the sternum. But he ended up bleeding out. There was so much blood that he probably bled out before, the medical staff ended up responding. So at that point, the Sally Port door, it opens up. They obviously know something's kicking off. You got the two bombers. They start bombing on Flaco. And apparently one of the shooters ended up running to C-section door, and they threw the weapon under the door. There was a Sureño that just so happened to be out there from Rockford. He grabs the weapon, gets it to another cell. The weapon gets flushed, so they don't find a weapon. The weapon was never intercepted, and they know, or they believe they know who's involved, because there's obviously only a few people that are out at that time, and they know who the victim is. So everybody that was out there, they pretty much got gaffled up, and allegedly they felt like they were involved. Whether or not they knew who the shooters were, I don't know. I'm not gonna go that deep into this because nobody ended up getting convicted, and it's not like somebody could watch this story right here and say, oh, based on this, we're gonna go convict somebody. Bullshit. So don't even try it. The thing is nobody got convicted on this case is because the investigating officers that investigated this case, they sabotaged the case, not on purpose, but it was sabotage based off of, the chain of evidence that was contaminated somehow. And then, after these guys all got gaffled up, I know that they ended up taking, like 6 Sureños. I know Junior, Spooky, Junior from Monte Flores, they got Spooky. I want to say he was from South Central, but then you had Spantos from Puente, and then you had Flaco from State Street in Los. So, they gaffled up all these Sureños. They ended up taking them to the watch office, and that's when they pretty much learned that Sapo had died, based off of his injuries. And, they charged him with murder or with participating in a murder. And apparently what these investigating officers did was they put a tape recording in one of the rooms, and, they did a sloppy job at doing it. These guys ended up seeing the tape, the way that it was taped, and they followed the tape, and that went up under a table where there was a recording device. So, at some point they got these guys in there, and they realized that these guys were onto them and that they had found the recording. And so there was a whole bunch of shit that happened behind the scenes that ended up sabotaging this case. And then the mother, Sapo's mom, apparently she tried to file a civil suit based off the death of her son. So there was a lot of shit that happened behind this case right here. I'm sure that there's a lot of you that probably remember this incident when it took place. But these were the type of incidents that were happening all over, in different prisons in California in the 90s. This was commonplace. The war was on at that time. So, there's a peace treaty going on right now. It's a good thing. A lot of these youngsters that are coming to prison right now, they never really experienced that a lot of us older guys from that time, they didn't go through the same experiences that we went through. But here's the cool part about this story, or like I always say, here's the kicker. So later on, the story goes on to where, these guys are there in Ad Safe fighting the case for a while. Eventually, Evo ends up getting transferred out. He ends up in another prison, and he runs into somebody that was familiar with the situation, or somebody that knew Rascal. And apparently Rascal was claiming now that he never gave the green light on Sapo. Not only that, he went triple CMS, and then he ended up locking it up. But he basically threw everybody under the bus and said everybody that moved on Sapo, they acted under their own accord. That he never gave the green light. He never claimed that Mondo was his compadre, all that. So that's some cold shit. This was somebody that basically snuck through the yard, took the yard over, had all kinds of people hit. And, his whole plan was to get on triple CMS. That was his plan, obviously, from the get-go. He got on triple CMS, walked away. So again, although they try to implicate several different Sureños in this case right here, none of them ended up getting charged, or none of them ended up getting convicted. They were charged, but the case was later thrown out because, again, they sabotaged the case. They mishandled the evidence. There were things about the tape recorder being put in there that they shouldn't have did. They came in and they took blood from these guys without court orders. There was all kind of mishaps, different steps along the way that basically violated their constitutional rights. And as a result, the case got dumped. Not saying I wish anybody would have got convicted, but for the mother, it was probably kind of messed up for her. She had to accept the fact that her son was killed and that nobody was being held, accountable for it. And that's basically what happened. I don't even know what happened with the civil suit. But again, let me just say this one more time before I close this up. It was not my intention to open up any old wounds or to bring up any of that grief back to the surface that any of the families felt that were impacted by this story. I only agreed to tell this story because I know that there's still a lot of youngsters out there that are intrigued with going to prison. They think that there's something to glorify about going to prison, and they need to understand that prison is not a good environment to be in. People get killed. People lose their lives in prison all the time. People get hurt. They get stabbed. So that's the reason why I told this story, hoping that there's some youngster out there that will watch this or hear it and will come to the realization that, you know what, there's nothing about that place that's appealing to me. I don't want to go to prison. And that, Sapo losing his life, at some point will serve a purpose, some kind of purpose, that it didn't happen in vain. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this story right here. I got a couple other stories that I'm going to be telling you guys. I'm going to be working on them all week. Again, I got 2 other stories I'm going to try to put out right now. We're working overtime for you guys. Anyways, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close this one up. But for those of you guys that are getting in the raffle, we are going to hold that raffle on Saturday. If for some reason we don't do it Saturday, we're going to do it Sunday. So you guys need to get your tickets in. If you want to be a part of this raffle, we're doing 3 pairs of Jordans this week. So get your tickets in. They're $3 a ticket, as many tickets as you want. And you can either send in your tickets to either our Venmo or the Cash App. So you guys can either win some Jordans or you can keep wearing those Crocs that you guys been wearing out there. Anyways, with that being said, this is your boy B. I hope you guys enjoyed this story, and I'm out.